The news of the alien contact swept across the globe like wildfire. Millions tuned in to catch glimpses of the strange, otherworldly vessels hovering over the major cities of the world. Speculation ran rampant. Were these visitors friend or foe? What did they want from humanity? At the United Nations headquarters in New York, world leaders scrambled to organize a coordinated response. Among them was Dr. Michael Johnson, a renowned American physicist who had been tapped by the U.S. government to aid in assessing the situation. As he sat in the crowded conference room, Johnson couldn't help but feel a mixture of awe and unease. The alien ships, while undeniably advanced, seemed to defy the known laws of physics. How had they achieved such incredible feats of engineering and propulsion? "Gentlemen, ladies," the Secretary General began, addressing the assembled diplomats. "As you know, representatives from this alien civilization have made contact and are demanding an audience. They claim to be a peaceful race seeking cultural exchange and technological cooperation." Johnson leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. Something about the aliens' demands didn't sit right with him. Why would an advanced species go to the trouble of contacting humanity unless they had an ulterior motive? "They have requested that each nation provide offerings to demonstrate our worthiness," the Secretary General continued. "But they have not specified what these offerings should be." A murmur rippled through the room as the diplomats exchanged concerned glances. Johnson cleared his throat and raised his hand. "Mr. Secretary General, if I may." He waited for a nod of acknowledgement before continuing. "I can't help but feel there's more to this than meets the eye. These aliens have the capability to travel between stars, a feat we've only dreamed of. Why would they suddenly come to us, demanding tribute?" An older diplomat from Russia scoffed. "Tribute? Surely you're not suggesting we're being extorted by these visitors?" Johnson held up a hand. "I'm not saying that definitively, but we can't ignore the possibility. We know nothing about their motivations, their culture, or their true intentions. For all we know, these offerings could be a pretext to subjugate us." General Williams, the gruff military advisor from the United States, slammed his fist on the table. "Then we should take a firm stand, refuse their demands, and show them we won't be bullied." The room erupted into heated debate, with some diplomats arguing for caution and others rallying behind Williams' more aggressive approach. Johnson listened intently, his mind racing. There had to be a way to get a better understanding of these aliens without risking open conflict. As the discussion dragged on, the door to the conference room burst open, and a frantic aide rushed in. "Mr. Secretary General, the alien ships, they're moving." All eyes turned to the large screen at the front of the room, which flickered to life with live footage from around the world. The massive extraterrestrial vessels, which had hovered silently over the major cities, were now slowly drifting closer to the ground. "They're landing," someone shouted. Johnson felt a chill run down his spine. This was it, the moment of truth. The aliens were making their move, and humanity's response would be crucial. He needed to get a closer look, to study these visitors and uncover their true motives. "Mr. Secretary General," Johnson said, raising his voice above the din, "I request permission to lead a team to make direct contact with the aliens. We need to understand them better if we're to have any hope of negotiating favorable terms." The Secretary General considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, Dr. Johnson. Assemble your team and make preparations. Time is of the essence." Johnson felt a surge of adrenaline. This was his chance to uncover the truth and perhaps prevent a catastrophic conflict. He quickly exited the conference room, already formulating a plan of action. As he hurried down the bustling hallways of the UN, Johnson couldn't shake the nagging feeling that these alien visitors were not all they seemed. The stakes had never been higher, and the future of humanity hung in the balance. Dr. Johnson wasted no time assembling his team for the crucial mission to make first contact with the alien visitors. He handpicked a diverse group of experts, including xenobiologists, linguists, and military tacticians, all of whom shared his sense of unease about the aliens' true motives. As the team prepared to depart for the landing site, Johnson pulled aside General Williams, the gruff military advisor who had advocated for a more aggressive approach during the UN meeting. "General, I know you have concerns about negotiating with these aliens," Johnson said, his voice low and serious. "But I need your support on this mission. If we're going to get to the bottom of their intentions, we'll need to approach this carefully and objectively." Williams eyed him skeptically, his arms crossed over his chest. "I don't like it, Johnson. These aliens waltz in and start making demands. Sounds like a classic case of bullying to me." "I understand your perspective," Johnson replied, "but we can't afford to jump to conclusions. If we react too hastily, we risk escalating the situation in a way that could have devastating consequences for the entire planet." The general let out a frustrated sigh. "All right, fine. I'll play along. For now. But the second these aliens show their true colors, I'm pulling the trigger." Johnson nodded, knowing that was the best he could hope for. As the team boarded the specially outfitted transport aircraft, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and he was determined to uncover the aliens' true agenda before it was too late. The flight to the landing site was tense and silent, each member of the team lost in their own thoughts. Johnson stared out the window, watching as the massive alien vessels grew larger on the horizon. This was it, their first real chance to interact with the extraterrestrial visitors and learn about their intentions. When the aircraft touched down, Johnson and his team were ushered through a series of security checkpoints before finally being granted access to the designated meeting area. The alien ships hovered menacingly overhead, their sleek, otherworldly designs a stark contrast to the military hardware and anxious human observers that surrounded them. As Johnson approached the center of the meeting area, he spotted a group of alien figures emerging from one of the ships. They were humanoid in appearance, with slender frames and large almond-shaped eyes. Their movements were graceful and fluid, almost hypnotic to behold. Johnson took a deep breath and stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Greetings," he said, his voice clear and steady despite the pounding of his heart. "I am Dr. Michael Johnson, representing the peoples of Earth. We come in peace, hoping to learn more about your civilization and your intentions." The aliens paused, their expressionless faces betraying no hint of emotion. After a moment, one of them stepped forward, its voice a strange melodic hum that seemed to reverberate in Johnson's mind. "Humans of Earth," it said, "we are the Psylof, a peaceful race seeking to expand our knowledge and understanding of the universe. We have come to your world with an offer of friendship and cooperation." Johnson felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps his concerns about the aliens' true motives had been unfounded. "That is most welcome news," he replied. "We too seek to expand our knowledge and forge connections with other intelligent life in the cosmos." But as the alien representative continued speaking, Johnson's sense of unease began to grow. The Oxyloth spoke of offerings that the human nations would need to provide to demonstrate their worthiness, and of the consequences should these demands not be met. "What exactly do you require of us?" Johnson asked, his brow furrowing in concern. The alien paused, its large eyes seeming to bore into Johnson's very soul. "That, human, is a matter to be discussed with your world's leaders. We expect a response within your Earth cycle known as a week." With that, the Oxyloth representative turned and began to retreat back toward the alien ship. Johnson watched, his mind racing, as the being effortlessly glided across the ground, its movements almost hypnotic to behold. As the team made their way back to the transport aircraft, Johnson couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of the Psyloth's true intentions. The talk of offerings and consequences weighed heavily on his mind, and he knew that the fate of humanity now rested in the hands of the world's leaders. The clock was ticking, and the stakes had never been higher. Johnson could only hope that he and his team had enough time to uncover the Psyloth's deception before it was too late. As word of the aliens' demands spread across the globe, Nations scrambled to determine what sort of offerings would be deemed acceptable by the mysterious Psyloth race. The pressure was on, with the deadline for a response looming just a week away. Dr. Johnson returned from the initial contact mission and immediately began briefing world leaders on what he had learned. His warnings about the ominous undertones of the Psyloth's request for offerings were met with a mix of concern and skepticism. Offerings? Scoffed General Williams during a tense meeting at the White House. These aliens show up out of the blue and start making demands. Sounds like a shakedown to me. The President of the United States frowned, drumming his fingers on the polished oak table. Be that as it may, General, we can't afford to dismiss their request outright. If we want to maintain peaceful relations, we'll need to find a way to satisfy their demands. Johnson cleared his throat, drawing the room's attention. Mr. President, with all due respect, I'm not convinced these offerings are as innocuous as they seem. Based on my interaction with the Psyloth representative, their tone and body language suggested an underlying threat. I believe we need to approach this very carefully. A murmur of concern rippled through the gathered officials. The president held up a hand, silencing the room. What are you suggesting, Doctor? That we refuse their request? Not necessarily, Johnson replied, choosing his words carefully. But perhaps we can buy ourselves some time to better understand their true motives. If we can stall on providing the offerings, it may give us a chance to gather more intelligence and prepare accordingly. General Williams leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. And if they don't take kindly to us dragging our feet, you saw what those ships can do. We need to be ready to respond with force if necessary. Johnson sighed, recognizing the general's valid concerns. I understand your position, General, but I truly believe that a measured diplomatic approach is our best chance of averting a catastrophic conflict. These aliens have technology far beyond our own. We can't afford to provoke them prematurely. The room fell silent as the officials considered Johnson's words. After a long pause, the president spoke up. All right, Doctor. We'll try your strategy of delay and diplomacy, but I want contingency plans in place, just in case. General, work with Dr. Johnson to ensure we're prepared for any eventuality. Williams nodded, his expression grim. Understood, Mr. President. As the meeting adjourned, Johnson felt a sense of cautious optimism. At least the leadership was willing to give his approach a chance, but he knew that time was not on their side. The Psyloth would be expecting a response soon, and they needed to use every moment wisely to uncover the aliens' true intentions. In the days that followed, Johnson and his team worked tirelessly, poring over every scrap of data and footage they could gather from the initial contact. They analyzed the aliens' physiology, their language, their technology, searching for any clues that could shed light on the Psyloth's motivations. Meanwhile, government officials around the world grappled with the question of what to offer the aliens. Some advocated for grand gestures, like showcasing humanity's greatest technological achievements or cultural treasures. Others argued for a more modest approach, fearing that overly lavish offerings could be interpreted as a sign of weakness. As the deadline drew closer, tensions mounted. General Williams grew increasingly impatient, pushing for a more aggressive stance. We can't keep stalling forever, Johnson, he growled during one heated exchange. Sooner or later, we're going to have to show these aliens that we won't be bullied. Johnson understood the general's frustration, but he remained steadfast in his belief that a cautious diplomatic approach was the best path forward. We're making progress, General, he insisted. I'm confident that if we can just buy a little more time, we'll uncover something that gives us leverage in these negotiations. The clock was ticking, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance. Johnson knew that the decisions made in the days ahead would shape the course of history. He could only hope that his team's efforts would bear fruit before it was too late. As the deadline for the aliens' offerings drew ever closer, the pressure on world leaders mounted. Heated debates raged in the halls of power, with some advocating for appeasement and others calling for a show of force. Dr. Johnson, still leading the team tasked with uncovering the Psyloth's true motives, found himself caught in the middle of this geopolitical storm. His pleas for caution were often met with skepticism, particularly from the more hawkish officials like General Williams. "We're running out of time, Johnson," the general growled during one particularly tense meeting. "These aliens have made their demands, and we need to respond. I say we show them what humanity is capable of." Johnson held up a hand, his expression calm but firm. "General, I understand your frustration, but we can't afford to act rashly. We're talking about the fate of the entire planet here. If we provoke these aliens prematurely, the consequences could be catastrophic." The President of the United States, who had been listening intently, raised a hand to silence the arguing factions. "Dr. Johnson has a point, General. As much as I'd like to take a hard line, we need to be careful. We still don't know the full extent of the Psylocke's capabilities or their true intentions." General Williams scowled, but he held his tongue, recognizing the futility of further argument. Sensing an opportunity, Johnson pressed on. "Mr. President, I believe we need to stall for more time. My team has made some promising discoveries about the Psylocke, but we're still piecing together the puzzle. If we can delay our response for just a little while longer, I'm confident we'll uncover something that gives us leverage in these negotiations." The President considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, Doctor. I'll authorize an extension on the deadline, but only for a few more days. The world is watching, and we can't afford to appear weak." "Thank you, sir," Johnson replied, relief evident in his voice. "I promise we'll make the most of this time." As the meeting adjourned, Johnson hurried back to his research team, eager to share the news. But when he arrived, he found the atmosphere tense and somber. "What's happened?" he asked, a sense of dread creeping up his spine. One of the scientists, a young woman named Sarah, stepped forward, her face pale. "Dr. Johnson, we've detected a significant increase in activity from the alien ships. They're powering up their weapons systems." Johnson felt his heart skip a beat. "Are you certain?" Sarah nodded grimly. "Yes, sir. Our sensors are picking up energy spikes consistent with charged plasma cannons and other advanced armaments. It looks like they're preparing for combat." Johnson cursed under his breath, his mind racing. "Have you informed the military?" "Yes, General Williams and his team are aware," Sarah replied. "They're mobilizing ground and air forces, but I don't know if we can match the Psylocke's firepower." The realization of the gravity of the situation hit Johnson like a ton of bricks. If the aliens attacked, the human forces stood little chance of mounting an effective defense, and with the deadline looming, the world's leaders might feel compelled to capitulate to the Psylocke's demands, regardless of the consequences. Johnson knew he had to act fast. Turning on his heel, he rushed back to the White House, determined to warn the president and convince him to take decisive action. As he burst into the Oval Office, the president and his advisors looked up, startled by his sudden appearance. "Mr. President, we have a situation," Johnson said, his voice laced with urgency. "The alien ships are powering up their weapons systems. I believe they're preparing to attack." The room erupted into a flurry of activity, with officials scrambling to confirm the news and coordinate a response. The president's face hardened, his gaze unwavering. "Then we have no choice," he said, his voice grave. "Activate the global defense grid. We must be ready to repel the Psylocke's assault, whatever the cost." Johnson nodded, knowing that the die had been cast. The world was on the brink of war, and humanity's future hung in the balance. Despite the growing tensions and the ominous signs of the Psylocke's impending attack, the world's leaders knew they had to make a show of good faith and present their offerings to the alien visitors. Failure to do so could be seen as an act of defiance, potentially provoking the very conflict they were trying to avoid. Dr. Johnson, having warned the president and his advisors of the risks, reluctantly agreed to accompany the diplomatic delegation to the designated meeting site. He knew that his presence could help provide valuable insight and potentially avert disaster, but the pit of unease in his stomach refused to subside. As the convoy of armored vehicles approached the makeshift staging area, Johnson couldn't help but notice the heavy military presence that had been deployed. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, and anti-aircraft batteries stood ready, their crews on high alert. The message was clear. The humans were prepared to defend themselves if necessary. When the delegation finally reached the meeting zone, the Tyloth ships hovered ominously overhead, their sleek, otherworldly forms casting long shadows over the gathered crowd. Johnson felt a chill run down his spine as he caught sight of the alien representatives, their features still as serene and unreadable as they had been during their previous encounter. The President of the United States stepped forward, his expression placid, but his eyes betraying a hint of trepidation. "Greetings, representatives of the Tyloth," he began, his voice carefully measured. "On behalf of the nations of Earth, we have assembled a collection of offerings, as you have requested." Johnson watched intently as the human delegation began to unveil their carefully curated gifts, a selection of cultural artifacts, advanced scientific instruments, and even samples of Earth's natural resources. The Tyloth representatives observed in silence, their expressions unreadable. As the presentation drew to a close, the lead alien representative stepped forward, its movements fluid and graceful. "Humans of Earth," it intoned, its voice resonating through the air like a haunting melody. "Your offerings are adequate. However, they do not meet the full measure of our expectations." A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd, and Johnson felt his heart sink. He had feared this outcome, and now it seemed his worst suspicions were about to be confirmed. The alien continued, its tone growing colder. "You have not demonstrated your worthiness to join the greater community of civilizations. Your primitive technology and fractured societies are unacceptable. We require more substantial contributions if you wish to be considered for inclusion." General Williams, his face flushed with anger, stepped forward. "More contributions? You've got some nerve, alien. We've given you our best, and if that's not enough then—" The President raised a hand, silencing the general. "Please, let us discuss this further. Surely there must be some way we can negotiate an agreement that is satisfactory to both our peoples." But the Tyloth representative simply shook its head, its eyes narrowing. "There will be no further negotiations. You have been found wanting, and the consequences will be severe." With that, the alien representative turned and began to retreat, its companions following closely behind. Johnson felt a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach as he watched them go, the weight of the Tyloth's ominous warning hanging heavy in the air. As the delegation returned to the safety of the military encampment, the mood was somber and tense. General Williams paced back and forth, his jaw clenched tight. "I knew we shouldn't have trusted these aliens," he growled. "Now they're going to make us pay for our inadequacy." Johnson sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm afraid you may be right, General. The Tyloth have made it clear that they have no intention of accepting our offerings, and if they see us as unworthy, there's no telling what they might do." The President, his brow furrowed in deep thought, turned to Johnson. "Doctor, do you have any insight into what the Tyloth might be planning? Anything that could give us an advantage in this situation?" Johnson shook his head, his expression grim. "I wish I did, Mr. President. But the truth is, we still don't fully understand the Tyloth's motives or the extent of their technological capabilities. All I know is that we need to be prepared for the worst." The President nodded, his eyes hardening with resolve. "Then that's what we'll do. General, mobilize our forces. We can't afford to be caught off guard when the Tyloth make their move." As the military personnel sprang into action, Johnson couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The fate of humanity now hung in the balance, and he could only hope that they were ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. The world held its breath in the tense days that followed the disastrous offerings presentation to the Tyloth representatives. Militaries around the globe had been put on high alert, bracing for the alien civilization's promised consequences for humanity's perceived unworthiness. Dr. Michael Johnson, The brilliant physicist who had warned of the Psylof's true intentions found himself at the heart of the frenetic preparations. Working closely with General Williams and other military strategists, he pored over every scrap of data and intelligence they had gathered about the alien technology and tactics. "We need to be ready for anything," Johnson stressed during a critical planning session. "These Hyloth have capabilities that far exceed our own. Any misstep could be catastrophic." General Williams, his weathered face etched with determination, nodded grimly. "You're damn right, Johnson. My men are primed and ready, but we all know we're outgunned. If those alien ships decide to unleash their full firepower, we may not stand a chance." The President of the United States, who had been listening intently, held up a hand to quiet the room. "Then we need to find a way to even the playing field. Doctor, what can you tell us about the Psylof's weaknesses or vulnerabilities?" Johnson shook his head slowly. "I wish I had a clear answer for you, Mr. President. The truth is, we still don't fully understand the extent of their technological capabilities, their ships, their weapons, even their physiology. It's all so foreign and advanced that it's difficult to pinpoint any obvious flaws or weaknesses." The room fell silent, the weight of the situation palpable. Finally, the President spoke up, his voice resolute. "Then we'll have to buy ourselves some time. Issue a global alert. Tell everyone to seek shelter and prepare for the worst. We need to stall the Psylof's advance for as long as possible." As the order was relayed to military and civilian authorities around the world, Johnson felt a surge of both relief and dread. At least the human race would have a fighting chance, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead was almost overwhelming. The wait was agonizing, with the population of Earth glued to their screens, watching and waiting for the Psylof's next move. Then, without warning, the alien ships, which had hovered silently over the major cities, began to move, slowly descending toward the ground. "They're attacking," someone shouted, and chaos erupted. Across the globe, the Psyloth vessels opened fire, unleashing devastating barrages of energy weapons that cut through human defenses like a hot knife through butter. Skyscrapers crumbled, military installations were reduced to smoldering rubble, and countless lives were lost in the initial assault. Johnson, his heart pounding, watched the carnage unfold on the monitors in the command center. "My God," he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "We never had a chance." General Williams, his face a mask of grim determination, barked orders to his troops, desperately trying to mount a counterattack. But the human forces were simply no match for the sheer power and precision of the Psylof's firepower. As the battle raged on, Johnson found himself torn between his desire to help and his realization that there was little he could do. His scientific knowledge, while invaluable, was no match for the overwhelming technological superiority of the alien invaders. Suddenly, a young lieutenant rushed into the command center, her eyes wild with panic. "Sir, the Psylof have breached the perimeter. They're heading straight for the White House." Johnson felt his blood run cold. The President, and with him, the last hope for coordinating a global defense, was in mortal danger. He turned to General Williams, his expression desperate. "General, we have to get the President to safety. If the Psylof capture or kill them, it's game over for all of us." Williams nodded, his jaw set in a grim line. "I'm on it, Johnson. You stay here and keep coordinating our defenses. I'll lead the extraction team personally." As the general and his troops raced to the White House, Johnson could only watch and pray that they would make it in time. The fate of the entire human race now hung in the balance. The battle raged on, with the Psylof systematically dismantling the human forces, their advanced technology proving to be an insurmountable obstacle. Johnson felt a crushing sense of helplessness as he witnessed the carnage unfold. But just when all seemed lost, a glimmer of hope emerged. General Williams, battered and bruised, burst back into the command center, the President in tow. "We got him out, Doctor," the general panted. "Now let's show these aliens what we're made of." Johnson nodded, a renewed determination burning in his chest. If humanity was going to have any chance of survival, they would need to find a way to turn the tide of the battle. And he was determined to do whatever it took to ensure their victory. With the president safely extracted from that Psyloph onslaught, Dr. Johnson and the military strategists worked feverishly to coordinate a counterattack. Time was of the essence as the alien invaders continued their systematic devastation of the world's major cities and military strongholds. "We need to hit them hard and fast before they can regroup," General Williams said, his voice laced with a mixture of urgency and resolve. "My men are ready, but we're going to need every advantage we can get." Johnson nodded, his mind racing. "I've been analyzing the data we've collected on the Psyloph's technology and tactics. There may be a way to exploit their weaknesses, but it's going to require some unorthodox thinking." The president, his face etched with determination, leaned forward in his chair. "Whatever it takes, Doctor. If we don't find a way to turn the tide, humanity may not survive this invasion." Johnson took a deep breath, knowing the gravity of the situation. "All right. Here's what we're going to do." In the hours that followed, the human forces began to mobilize, drawing on a diverse array of technological and strategic innovations. Fighter jets, armed with cutting-edge electromagnetic pulse (EMP) weapons, took to the skies, targeting the Psyloph's ships with devastating precision. Meanwhile, ground-based artillery units, equipped with specialized plasma cannons, laid down a withering barrage of fire, attempting to breach the alien vessel's formidable defenses. Armored divisions, their tanks retrofitted with experimental railguns, advanced on the Psyloph landing zones, engaging in fierce close-quarters combat. At the heart of the counterattack was Dr. Johnson, whose deep understanding of the Psyloph's technology had been instrumental in devising these unorthodox tactics. He moved between command centers, providing real-time tactical guidance and making split-second decisions that could mean the difference between victory and defeat. As the battle raged on, the human forces began to gain ground, slowly but surely chipping away at the Psyloph's overwhelming advantage. The aliens, seemingly caught off guard by the humans' innovative approach, found themselves struggling to adapt to the new challenges they faced. "They're faltering," General Williams shouted, his eyes alight with a fierce determination. "Keep the pressure on. Men, don't let up." The human troops, inspired by the general's words and the sight of their alien adversaries beginning to buckle, pressed the attack with renewed vigor. Across the globe, the tide of the battle began to turn, with the Psyloph's once devastating onslaught faltering in the face of the humans' ingenuity and resilience. Johnson, watching the progress unfold on the command center's monitors, felt a surge of hope. "It's working," he murmured, his voice tinged with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "We're actually doing it." As the Psyloph ships began to retreat, the human forces let out a collective roar of triumph. The president, his face flushed with a mixture of pride and exhaustion, clasped Johnson's hand, his eyes shining with gratitude. "You did it, Doctor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You helped save humanity." Johnson shook his head, a wry smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I couldn't have done it without the courage and determination of our people. This victory belongs to all of us." In the aftermath of the battle, the world began to rebuild, its scars a testament to the tenacity and resilience of the human spirit. The Psyloph, having suffered a devastating defeat, retreated to the far reaches of space, their plans for conquest thwarted by the unexpected strength of their former quarry. As the global community came together to heal and prepare for the future, Dr. Johnson found himself the subject of widespread adulation and respect. His pivotal role in devising the strategies that turned the tide of the battle had cemented his legacy as one of the greatest heroes in human history. But despite the accolades and the newfound sense of optimism, Johnson couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the Psyloph might one day return, their thirst for conquest unquenched. He knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but he was determined to ensure that humanity would be ready, no matter what challenges the future might hold. As the world celebrated its hard-won victory, Johnson quietly retreated to his laboratory, already hard at work on new technologies and innovations that could help safeguard the future of the human race. For he knew that the battle against the Tyloth was far from over, and that the stakes had never been higher. In the aftermath of the epic battle between humanity and the alien Tyloth invaders, the world began the long and difficult process of rebuilding. Cities lay in ruins, economies were in shambles, and countless lives had been lost. But the spirit of the human race had been forged in the crucible of adversity, and a newfound determination had taken hold. At the heart of this remarkable recovery effort stood Dr. Michael Johnson, the brilliant physicist whose innovative thinking had been instrumental in turning the tide of the war. Hailed as a hero by people across the globe, Johnson found himself in high demand. His expertise and insights sought after by leaders and scientists alike. "We owe you a great debt, Doctor," the president said during a ceremony honoring the key figures who had contributed to humanity's triumph. "Without your vision and your courage, we may not be standing here today." Johnson simply shook his head, his expression humble. "I was merely a part of a much larger effort, Mr. President. The true heroes are the men and women who fought and sacrificed to defend our world." As the accolades and commendations piled up, Johnson found himself increasingly drawn to the task of ensuring that humanity would be prepared for any future threats that might arise. He knew, deep in his bones, that the Tyloth had been merely the first in a long line of challenges that the human race would have to face. Assembling a team of the world's top scientists and military strategists, Johnson set to work on developing cutting-edge technologies and innovative defensive systems that could help safeguard the planet. From advanced energy weapons capable of overwhelming even the Tyloth's formidable ships to early warning systems that could detect the approach of alien civilizations, no stone was left unturned. "We can't afford to be caught off guard again," Johnson said during a series of high-level briefings. "The Tyloth may have been beaten back this time, but who's to say they won't return, or that another alien race won't try to subjugate us? We need to be ready for anything." The world's leaders, having witnessed the devastation wrought by the Tyloth invasion, were quick to lend their support to Johnson's ambitious endeavors. Funding poured in, and the best minds from across the globe flocked to his cause, eager to be a part of the effort to secure humanity's future. As the years passed, Johnson's team made remarkable strides, developing technologies that pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible. Powerful energy shields, capable of withstanding even the most devastating alien weapons, were deployed around the world's major cities and strategic locations. Massive interlinked sensor arrays scanned the heavens, vigilantly watching for any signs of an approaching threat. And at the heart of it all was Dr. Johnson, his boundless energy and singular focus driving the project forward. He spent countless hours poring over data, designing new systems, and coordinating the efforts of his far-flung team. Sleep became a luxury, as he dedicated himself fully to the mission of ensuring that humanity would never again be caught off guard. "We can't afford to let our guard down," he would often say, his eyes burning with determination. "The fate of our species is at stake, and we can't afford to fail." As the decades passed, the world was transformed, the scars of the Tyloth invasion slowly healing. The global community, once fractured, had come together in the face of adversity, forging new bonds of cooperation and understanding. And at the center of it all was Dr. Johnson, the unsung hero whose vision and tireless efforts had played a pivotal role in securing humanity's future. When the Tyloth did eventually return, decades later, they found a very different world waiting for them. The defensive systems and early warning networks put in place by Johnson's team were more than a match for the alien invaders, and the human forces, now armed with advanced weaponry and battle-hardened tactics, were able to repel the attack with relative ease. As the Tyloth ships retreated once more, their tails tucked firmly between their legs, a cheer went up from the human populace. They had proven their worth, their resilience, and their determination to never again be caught off guard. And at the center of the celebration, quietly observing the jubilant crowds, stood Dr. Michael Johnson. A small smile played at the corners of his lips as he realized that his life's work had come to fruition. Humanity was safe for now, and the future had never looked brighter. With a newfound sense of hope and optimism, Johnson turned his gaze toward the stars, already contemplating the next great challenge that might await. For he knew that the journey to secure humanity's place in the cosmos had only just begun.